Ritsuka was walking down the hallway, pumped for his usual summoning sessions. Alright, let's see what I'll summon today, he thought as he was happily carrying his Saint Quartz. As he was headed towards the summoning room, he noticed that there was someone else already in there. And that person was Gadako, also known as Fujiwara Ritsuka, from another timeline. That's Gadako. What's she doing over there? He thought as he soon began to enter into the room. Meanwhile, Gadako looked at her surroundings in the room. As she did, she felt a sense of familiarity as she remembered the many times she would come into the summoning room in her timeline. Wow. Even in another timeline, this place still looks the same like before, although there are a few differences, but it doesn't matter. Chaldea is still Chaldea. Soon, Gadako noticed Ritsuka coming into the room. Ah, hey there Ritsuka. You plan on doing a summoning with those Saint Quartz of yours? Yeah. Hopefully I can get something today. Gadako let out a chuckle. Summoning a servant with Saint Quartz, huh, that's nostalgic. Eh? You did the same thing as I did in your timeline? Yeah. During my time in Chaldea, I would gather enough Saint Quartz and would use them to get servants from that same summoning altar here. Is that so? How did that go for you? For a moment, Gadako didn't say anything but let out a chuckle that sounded a little evil. Well, let's just say, I had to work a lot just to get those Saint Quartz, and the results were quite depressing. She muttered in slight despair. Feeling sympathy for her, Ritsuka immediately knew not to go even further with the conversation. Anyways, I'm about to try to summon a servant now. Want to see me do it? Oh, yeah, Gadako replied, snapping out of her earlier depression. Soon, Ritsuka then placed the Saint Quartz onto the summoning altar. As he did, the altar lit up and in an instant, multiple blue orbs appeared in the air and connected with each other. They then turned into a rite of blue sparks and swirled around with each other, forming a ring that then split into three and continued to swirl around until it turned into a pillar of light. As the light faded, it revealed a gold card showing a man wearing a wolf's head with his arms bended while carrying a giant sword. The card then disappeared as a woman appeared. The woman looked like Arturia, but has a different shade of color on her hair, has blue eyes, was wearing a dress, her hair was tied up in a bow like Arturia lilies, and was carrying a spear staff that has the same markings as Excalibur Morgan. Ritsuka and Gadako were surprised upon seeing the new servant. However, Gadako was more surprised than Ritsuka himself. So, you have summoned me. Berserker, Morgan. I'm the Queen of the Fey Nation Britain, and the one who continues cursing panhuman history. If you don't have a problem with that, I'll lend you my power as a servant. It's an unchangeable fact that I'm a queen. I expect you to work as my retainer. Or perhaps do you want me to treat you as my husband? For a moment, Ritsuka was completely confused with Morgan's words. Huh? Husband? But I'm not an adult yet. Meanwhile, Gadako was having different thoughts of her own. What the hell? My male counterpart actually summoned Morgan? And the Morgan from the 6th Lost Belt? What is going on here? Just what happened to this world's Chaldea summoning system? First was Scat Hack Scotty, then Caster Arturia, and now this. Is this a dream? Morgan then noticed Gadako's confusion and looks and turned to her. You, over there. Are you my master as well? She asked to Gadako, snapping her out of her thoughts. Ah, no. I'm a servant here, like you, Gadako replied. I see. Are you a berserker like myself? Nope. Alter ego. My name is Gadako, by the way. I see. How about you, my husband? And me? My name is Fujiwara Ritsuka, Ritsuka replied. Ritsuka, that's a good name, Morgan said as she got off from the summoning altar. As she did, the summoning altar began to light up again. As it did, multiple blue orbs appeared in the air and connected with each other. They then turned into a rite of blue sparks and swirled around with each other, forming a ring that then split into three and continued to swirl around until it turned into a pillar of light. As the light faded, it revealed a silver card showing a knight holding a sword with both hands. However, the card started to cackle as gold sparks moved around the card, turning it into a gold saber class card. The card then disappeared as a woman appeared. The woman herself was wearing a set of armor like Gawain's with a few modifications, has blonde hair and was wearing a crown, has blue-greenish eyes, and was carrying a sword like Excalibur Gallatin. Fairy Knight Gawain will now enroll your division, Fairy Knight Gawain said. As she did, she then noticed Morgan, who was looking at her. "Ah. My Highness Morgan. You are here too?" "Yes. Just shortly before you were summoned," Morgan replied. "Anyways, meet my husband, Fujiwara Ritsuka." Fairy Knight Gawain quickly turned to Ritsuka. "Him? He's your husband? He seems to be a bit weak for me," she said as she examined him. "If you plan on being my Highness Morgan's husband, you better not let her down, or else I'll kill you. Got it?" "Why yes," Ritsuka said in fear. Meanwhile, Gadako was going through the shock of her life. What the hell? Now Fairy Knight Gawain, or rather Barghest, is here too. What is going on here? What's next? The rest of the knights come here as well. As Gadako was freaking out, it was then Fairy Knight Gawain noticed her. "And who are you?" she asked, making Gadako jump. "That is Gadako, a servant just like us, although in a different class," Morgan said. "I see," she said before she examined her. It was then the summoning altar began to light up again. As it did, multiple blue orbs appeared in the air and connected with each other. They then turned into a rite of blue sparks and swirled around with each other, forming a ring that then split into three and continued to swirl around until it turned into a pillar of light. As the light faded, it revealed a gold card showing a woman holding a bow and arrow, readying herself to shoot in the air. The card then disappeared as a girl appeared. Unlike the last two servants that came before her, the girl has reddish hair, pale skin, gray eyes, and was wearing a red gothic dress with high heels with a black crown on her head. Servant, Archer. Fairy Knight Tristan, I arrived to answer your summons. I promise to play a role that won't bring shame to the name of knights. Just kidding, hi ha 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 ha, she said as she was laughing before noticing Morgan and Fairy Knight Gawain. Oh my! Your Highness! Fairy Knight Gawain! You're here as well. Yeah. Looks like you're here too, Fairy Knight Tristan, Morgan said. Yeah, I suppose, she said as she glanced around the summoning room. As she did, she looked upon both Ritsuka and Gadako with a sneer on her face. And who are those two humans over there? Those two over there are Ritsuka and Gadako. Gadako is a servant of Chaldea, while Ritsuka is my husband and the master of Chaldea. Fairy Knight Tristan raised one of her eyebrows upon hearing Morgan's words. Huh? That human over there? He's your husband, she said as she began to examine Ritsuka. Huh. He looks so weak. I know, right? He doesn't look that strong to me. Fairy Knight Gawain said. Be quiet, you two. Looks like we may have one more visitor coming here, Morgan said as she was looking at the summoning altar, which was lighting up again, making both Fairy Knight Gawain and Fairy Knight Tristan look as well. Meanwhile, Gadako was still in complete shock. Okay, this is not happening. Chaldea are getting servants from one of the lost belts right now, and judging by this situation, I have a feeling who the final servant might be. As the altar was lighting up, multiple blue orbs appeared in the air and connected with each other. They then turned into a ride of blue sparks and swirled around with each other, forming a ring that then split into three and continued to swirl around until it turned into a pillar of light. As the light faded, it revealed a gold card showing a man holding a spear. The card then disappeared as a girl appeared. The girl herself has white hair, bronze/yellow eyes, and was wearing blue armor with some neon lines on the sides and the chest area as detail. On her arms were scabbards that looked like gauntlets. I knew it. Fairy Knight Lancelot is summoned as well. Servant, Lancer. Fairy Knight Lancelot has arrived in response to your summons, she said before she noticed her fellow knights and Morgan. HM? Your Highness? Ah, Fairy Knight Lancelot, you're here too, Morgan said. It seems so. Anyways, who is my master? Is it one of those two over there? Or is it both of them, she asked as she turned to Ritsuka and Gadako. HM? Ah, let me introduce them to you. The one on the left is Fujiwara Ritsuka and the one on the right is Gadako. Gadako is a servant of Chaldea, just like us, and Fujiwara Ritsuka is the master of Chaldea, as well as my husband. Eh? He's your husband? Fairy Knight Lancelot asked, before she came up to him. HM. He doesn't seem all that reliable though. Oh, he will be, once he goes through my training, Morgan said with a sly grin on her face. Upon seeing that sly grin of hers, both Ritsuka and Gadako shivered in fear. Okay, this is starting to scare me, Gadako whispered to Ritsuka. You can say that again. Anyways, want to change the pace? Ritsuka replied. Obviously. I don't want to see Morgan's so-called training. Wanting to not experience that, Ritsuka quickly changed the conversation. Anyways, me and Gadako should give all of you a tour of Chaldea since all of you are new to the place here. How does that sound? For a moment, Morgan and her knights were silent before giving him their answers. Very well, Morgan said. If that is what Her Highness wanted, then so shall it be, Fairy Knight Gawain said. Alright. This place does seems interesting at least, Fairy Knight Tristan said. Alright. Fairy Knight Lancelot said. Gadako let out a sigh of relief. Very well, let us be on our way. Merlin was walking down the hallway, minding his own business with a smile on his face. Alright, now that foe is out of my hands right now, time for me to enjoy myself. Now then, I wonder what will I do for today. As Merlin continued walking, it was then he came across a sight he thought he would never see again. Which was Morgan, although a different version of her to be more exact, but either way, Merlin was completely shocked upon seeing her again. What the heck? Why is Morgan here? And who are those three knights over there? And why do they remind me of Gawain, Tristan, and Lancelot a little? Meanwhile, Morgan noticed Merlin and let out a scowl. This presence, it's that damn wizard. Just what is he doing here? Don't tell me he plans on following me wherever I go to ruin my life. She thought angrily. It was then Ritsuka, Gadako, and the fairy knights noticed Morgan's scowl. Is there something wrong, Morgan/my highness? They asked. Morgan let out a sigh. Well, there's a certain wizard who seems to be hiding like a coward right now, she yelled as she brought out her spear staff and shot a burst of mana at the corner of the wall, making Merlin jump out of his hiding place. Merlin? Ritsuka and Gadako said in unison. Gay, it's Merlin, the damn wizard, the fairy knights said in unison. Geez, that's one way to get my attention. Merlin muttered as he got the dust off his robes. Nice to see you again, Morgan, although you seem to be different than before. TCH, what do you want, Merlin? And make it quick or else I'll end your pitiful life this instant, Morgan said. Oh, nothing. I was just walking, minding my business as usual. I swear, I wasn't doing anything right now. Merlin argued. Morgan let out a small sigh. And since that you're here, that means Arturia is here, right? Merlin stayed silent, confirming Morgan's question and making her let out a groan. Really? The abominable red dragon, Arturia, is here? You're in Uther's plan. Even if there isn't sin in her, I'll never forgive her. Someday I'll crush her underfoot, she said angrily. Merlin let out a chuckle before whispering to Ritsuka. Ritsuka, good luck with her. She's quite the troublesome student. Wait. Merlin dash. Bye, he said before he immediately left, making Ritsuka confused with what just happened. Gadako let out a small sigh. Well, looks like Merlin just decided to run away from his problems. I can see that, Ritsuka said. As always, when he sees something unpleasant from his past, he runs away. Senpai? At that moment, everyone turned around to see Mashu, who happened to look at the entire thing. HM? Oh, hey there Mashu, he said with a smile on his face. Hey there Senpai, she said as she looked at Morgan and the fairy knights. I take it that you summoned new servants today? Yeah, and Ritsuka said, but was cut off from Morgan. He's my husband, Morgan finished. For a moment, silence occurred between the two as Mashu was trying to process what just happened. Eh? You didn't hear me correctly? He's my husband, Morgan repeated. Hey. Husband? Mashu yelled. Yes, Morgan stated proudly. Mashu was in a loss of words as she was stumbling backwards until she hit a wall and passed out. Oh my, I think you broke her, Your Highness, Fairy Knight, Tristan said. It seems so. Morgan said as Ritsuka let out a sigh. Is there something wrong, my husband? Well, I have a bad feeling about something, and it's about to happen about. At that moment, 3 certain servants suddenly came into the hallway with angry looks on their faces. Minamoto no Reiku, Hasan of Serenity, and Kyoheim. Now, Ritsuka finished as he felt their presences. Oh boy, this is not going to end well. Gadako said as memories from her past about those 3 came into her head. Excuse me, who's the bitch that said Anshin-sama is her husband? Kyoheim angrily said as she can't hold her rage. How dare you? Fairy Knight Gawain yelled. This bitch. Fairy Knight Tristan yelled. Time to die. Fairy Knight Lancelot said in anger. All 3 of them prepared to draw their weapons, but Morgan stopped them before they could do so. HM? And who are you 3, she asked. I'm Minamoto no Reiku, Master's mother. Reiku said with anger in her voice. I'm Hasan of Serenity, Master's lover. Serenity said with anger in her voice. And I'm Kyoheim, Anshin-sama's real wife. Kyoheim said with anger in her voice. Morgan was a bit ticked off at Kyoheim's answer, but continued the conversation. I see. Well then, let me introduce myself to all of you then. I am Morgan Pendragon, the Queen of the Fey Nation Britain, and Ritsuka's wife as of now. At that moment, all 3 of them lost it, especially Kyoheim. Huh? Anshin-sama's wife? You? She yelled. Huh? Anshin-sama? What kind of name is that? It sounds so stupid that I can't even bear to hear it. Plus, Fujiwara Ritsuka is already my husband, no? Morgan said. Huh? Why you dash? And another thing, I sensed that you and Reiku are berserkers earlier, and let me tell you this. There's no need for any berserkers other than myself, so get lost. And that includes you too, Serenity. At that point, all 3 of them drew their weapons and proceeded to attack Morgan. That's it. Die you bitch, they yelled in unison. However, the fairy knights got in front of Morgan, protecting her. My fellow knights. Protect your highness. Fairy Knight Gawain said. Yes, the other fairy knights said in unison as they got in front of Morgan. Thus, a fight occurred between Reiku, Serenity, Kyoheim, and the fairy knights began, which Morgan, Ritsuka, and Gadako watching on the sidelines. Oh no, things got worse. Ritsuka looked in shock. Yeah. I hope that things don't get any worse than this. Gadako replied in agreement. Little did they know that they were wrong. Ouch, that really hurts like hell. Mordred mumbled. Arturia let out a sigh. That's the result of your reckless actions, Mordred. Next time, don't go charging at the enemy. But it's my natural fighting style, father. If anything, the enemies from earlier are a bunch of cowards for hiding in the trees with their bows and arrows. Mordred argued. Still though, you can't rush in without a plan. Now, Arturia said before she suddenly stopped. This presence, oh no, it can't be. Mordred was confused with Arturia's sudden reaction. Father, is there something wrong? Arturia let out a giant gulp before continuing the conversation. Mordred, she's here. She, oh no, you don't mean Dash? Mordred realized in fear. Yes. Morgan's here, and it's only a matter of time before she finds us, Arturia said as she finished answering Mordred's question. Well, no shit, Sherlock. We should dash. Will you two stop hiding over there? I can hear both of you, especially you, Arturia. Morgan muttered, especially in anger at the last part of her answer. Both Arturia and Mordred gulped and let out a sigh of defeat and came out of their hiding spot. As they did, they immediately saw Morgan and the fairy knights, who happened to be standing triumphantly over a knocked-out Mashu, Reiku, Serenity, and Kyoheim. Not only that, but Ritsuka and Gadako were here as well. He. Hey there, Arturia, Mordred. Ritsuka said nervously. Master, what is the meaning of this? Mordred muttered. Well, let's just say I've managed to summon 4 servants today. And out of those 4 servants, you summoned her of all people? Mordred yelled, especially at the last part of her sentence. Why yeah, sorry. Well then, I wasn't expecting to see you here of all places, Arturia. Morgan said. As she did, her gaze focused towards Mordred. And who are you, by the way? You seem to resemble Arturia. Mordred let out a growl. Huh? You don't remember me? I'm Mordred Pendragon. Your son, she said angrily. At that moment, Morgan was confused. Huh? My son? I don't remember having a son. And plus, aren't you a girl? That made Mordred even angrier. What did you say? Is my existence to you that worthless to the point where you don't even remember it at all? She yelled. What are you talking about? Morgan asked. Oh, that's it. Mordred yelled as she drew out Clarent, readying herself for a fight. However, before she could swing her sword, both Ritsuka and Arturia stopped them. Mordred stopped for a moment. I have a feeling this is not the Morgan we know, Arturia said. Huh? What do you mean by that? Mordred yelled. My husband, what is the meaning of this? And how does that girl know me? I don't even know her, Morgan said. Arturia and Mordred were surprised at that moment. Huh? Husband, they said in unison. Ritsuka let out a sigh. I'm going to have to explain that later. He thought before his attention went towards Morgan. Morgan, the person known as Mordred Pendragon, is your kid from Panhuman history. Morgan was shocked for a moment. You're kidding me. Yeah, and believe it or not, your Panhuman counterpart was obsessed with the downfall of Camelot and created Mordred in the process. Really? How so? Ritsuka gulped. Come closer for a moment. Morgan then got closer to Ritsuka. As she did, Ritsuka began to whisper something to her. After a few seconds, they split, with Morgan being surprised. Wow. Creating a copy of Arturia, was the me from Panhuman history so obsessed? Ah, no, forget it. I of all people lost my composure. Mordred, quite a decent work. Morgan then headed towards to where Arturia and Mordred were. For a moment, nothing happened as the three of them were staring at each other. What do you want, you old hag? Mordred asked angrily. The fairy knights got angry for a moment, but Morgan raised her hand, signaling them to not intervene. Oh my, you seem to have quite the language. Especially to your own mother that you should be more respectful of, Morgan said. Mordred got ticked a little. Huh, she said. She's right. You should be more respectful and grateful to our highness, who is your own mother. After all, she did bring you into this world, Fairy Knight Gawain said. That got Mordred pissed. Huh? You're telling me to be more respectful and grateful to her? Like hell I will. Not after what she did to me in the past. Plus, she's not my mother in many ways. Morgan was confused. Many ways? While it is true that I'm not the same person that gave birth to you, but what do you mean other ways? Mordred let out a smirk. Well, I have a new mother. He's better than you in many ways, and his name is Emiya Shirou. HM? Did someone call me? Shirou said. Both Arturia and Mordred jumped upon hearing Shirou's voice. As they did, they turned around to see Shirou, who happened to be in another corner of the hallway, carrying something in his hands. At that moment, both Arturia and Mordred were horrified, especially when Morgan was looking at him as well. Oh no! Shirou/mother is here. Why here of all places? Judging from the earlier replies, that man over there must be Emiya Shirou, who's supposed to be Mordred's new mother, but he's a man though. And for some reason, he seems different. Morgan thought as she turned to Arturia and Mordred. As she did, she was surprised with the reactions on their faces. Oh? That expression on Arturia's face, this Emiya Shirou must be important to him, but how much though? It was then Morgan began to walk towards Shirou, making both Arturia and Mordred agitated even further. Morgan, don't you dare! Arturia yelled. Stay away from mother! Mordred yelled. Ignoring their yelling, Morgan got closer to where Shirou was and proceeded to examine him, angering Arturia and Mordred even further. So, this is Emiya Shirou himself, HM? There's something inside of him, and it feels like there's a fate artifact in there. Meanwhile, Shirou was confused with what was going on with Morgan examining him. Morgan? So, this is Arturia's sister? He asked. HM. So you're Emiya Shirou, huh? She said as she was done examining him. Why yeah. So, what? Oh nothing, but I'll say this, she said as she placed one of her hands on Shirou's shoulder. You seem to be an interesting person. Eh? At that moment, Morgan felt two swords pointing at her neck. As she turned around, she saw the angry faces of Arturia and Mordred holding their swords. Leave, Shirou/mother, alone, they yelled in unison. Morgan let out a sigh. Fine, I will. She then walked towards to where Ritsuka, Gudako, and the fairy knights were. Let's go my husband, I want to see more of Chaldea. As you wish, Ritsuka said. Come on Gudako. Yeah. Soon, Ritsuka, Gudako, Morgan, and the fairy knights left, leaving Shirou, Arturia, and Mordred alone. Arturia, Mordred, why is Morgan here? And why did she call Ritsuka her husband? Shirou asked. I have no clue mother. And honestly, I don't care at this point now that she's gone, Mordred said with a sigh. Yeah. As long as you are safe from her, then everything is fine. If anything, do not associate yourself with her ever, Arturia said. Shirou silently nodded in agreement. Omake 1, Emergency Meeting. Arturia was running towards a certain room. As she did, she came into the room, which was filled with her counterparts. HM? Is there something wrong me? You seem to be exhausted, Arturia Lily said. For a moment, Arturia was gathering breath before she let out one sentence that made everyone freak out. Everyone, Morgan's back, she said. At that moment, Arturia's counterparts immediately stopped what they were doing. Well, this calls for an emergency meeting immediately, Arturia Alter said. Indeed, everyone else said in unison. And thus, a meeting between Arturia and her counterparts has begun. Omake 2, Knights Meet Fairy Knights. Gawain was surprised to hear that Morgan has arrived, especially with her own version of the Knights of the Round. Right now, in front of him is Fairy Knight Gawain. So, I take it that you share the name as me, Fairy Knight Gawain, Gawain said. Indeed, and to think you were one of Highness' children, quite the surprise I must say, Fairy Knight Gawain replied. I see, Gawain said as he was eyeing at a certain part of Fairy Knight Gawain's body. Mainly, her chest. Hey, where are you looking at? Fairy Knight Gawain asked angrily. Well, your armor, Gawain lied. At that moment, Fairy Knight Gawain punched Gawain. Meanwhile with Tristan. Tristan muttered as he was looking at his Fairy Knight counterpart. Hey, is there something wrong with what I'm wearing right now? Fairy Knight Tristan asked. Well, yeah. If you plan on using my name, at least have a sense of clothing. That outfit of yours looks too depressing for me, along with your makeup as well. At that moment, Fairy Knight Tristan got mad. Huh? Meanwhile with Lancelot. Lancelot didn't say anything as he was looking at his Fairy Knight counterpart, who was small by the way. About the same size of a kid. What? Is there something wrong with me? Fairy Knight Lancelot asked. Well no. It's just that, well, aren't you a little too short to be a knight? Lancelot replied. Omake 3, Counterparts. Morgan was walking down the hallway, minding her own business. As she did, she came across something she would never see in her lifetime. Which was Arturia's counterparts, and they were in the cafeteria. What the just how counterparts does Arturia have? This is ridiculous. Plus, one of them has a water gun. As much as I don't want to admit, I want one as well. Omake 4, Reversed Genders. Proto Merlin was walking down the hallway, with Arthur in tow. Say, Arthur Kuhn, what do you want to do today? Arthur let out a small sigh. If it involves any of your shenanigans, then I'll pass. Proto Merlin let out a pout. Meow. Quit being such a cheapskate. Arthur sighed again as they continued walking together. However, it was then they came across Morgan, who happened to be walking by. Both Arthur's and Proto Merlin's eyes widened upon seeing her. Morgan, they said in unison. HM? Do I know you too? Morgan asked. And you too, resemble that dreaded Merlin and Arturia. Arthur and Proto Merlin then looked at each other before turning to Morgan. You don't recognize me? No. I've never seen you before in my entire life. In fact, who are you? Morgan replied. Well, I'm Arthur Pendragon. Arthur said. And I'm Merlin. Proto Merlin said. Upon hearing Proto Merlin's, Morgan was in shock. What? You're Arthur Pendragon and Merlin? Yeah, from another world that is. Arthur said. At that moment, Morgan's mind shattered into pieces. What is hell? There's a male version of my sister? And Merlin's a woman in that world? Wait, does that make him my younger brother? It was at that moment Morgan learned that Chaldea is quite the crazy place. Oh, make 5, children. Morgan and Ritsuka were watching Gawain and Gareth playing together in the distance. So, those two are my children from panhuman history, huh? Yeah. Along with Mordred and those two, you also have another one as well, Ritsuka replied. I see, if they're my children, then that makes them your children too, my husband? Morgan asked as she got closer to him. Huh? Upon hearing those words, both Gawain and Gareth turned to Ritsuka. Father, they said in unison. Don't say that. I'm not old yet to be a father, Ritsuka yelled. At the same time, Reiku, Serenity, and Kyoheim looked at the scene with jealousy and anger in their eyes.